The Texas sun hung low and merciless over the Monroe Ranch, painting the endless stretch of scrubland in shades of rust and gold. Dust devils danced across the parched earth, carrying with them the scent of sage and the promise of another scorching day. This was 1875, and in this corner of the frontier, civilization was still more suggestion than certainty. Leona Monroe stood on the weathered porch of her family's modest ranch house, her calloused hands gripping the wooden railing as she watched the horizon. At 22, she had already seen more hardship than most women twice her age. Her mother's grave lay beneath a lone mesquite tree on the hill behind the house, marked by a simple wooden cross that had weathered 10 Texas summers. "Papa's late," she murmured to herself, green eyes narrowing against the glare. Her father, Samuel Monroe, had ridden out before dawn to check on their cattle near Willow Creek. He should have been back hours ago. The Monroe Ranch wasn't much to look at. 100 head of longhorns, a few horses, and land that fought them for every blade of grass. But it was theirs, carved from the wilderness with sweat and stubbornness. Leona had learned to ride before she could properly walk, learned to shoot before she'd finished her letters, and learned that in this land. Showing weakness was an invitation to disaster. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, too large for a single rider. Leona's hand instinctively moved to the Winchester propped against the porch post. She'd cleaned it that morning, as she did every morning. A ritual her father had instilled in her. A clean gun is a reliable gun, he'd say. And out here, reliability saves lives. As the dust cloud grew closer, Leona could make out 5 riders. Her stomach tightened. 5 men riding together usually meant one thing in these parts: trouble. She recognized the lead rider before she could make out his features. The way he sat his horse, arrogant and loose, like he owned the very air he breathed. Jedediah Crow. Crow was what passed for a businessman in these parts, though his business usually involved taking what wasn't his. He ran cattle when it suited him, bought land when he could, and took both when he couldn't. The law in Amarillo was 2 days' ride away, and sheriffs had a habit of looking the other way when Crow's name came up. "Miss Monroe," Crow called out as he reined in his black stallion just beyond the porch. He touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy. "Fine afternoon for a visit." "State your business." "Crow." Leona kept her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. The Winchester remained within easy reach. Crow's smile was all teeth and no warmth. He was a handsome man in the way a rattlesnake was beautiful, best admired from a distance. "Direct as always. I do admire that about you, Miss Monroe. Very well. I'm here to make your father an offer." "He's not here." "I can wait." Crow swung down from his horse with practiced ease, his men following suit. They spread out slightly, a move that didn't escape Leona's notice. "You see, I've been thinking about expanding my operations. This ranch of yours sits right where I need it to. Natural water access at Willow Creek. Good grazing land despite appearances. Your father's a smart man. He picked his spot well. The ranch isn't for sale." Crow's laugh was dry as tumblewood. "Everything's for sale. Miss Monroe, it's just a matter of price. Now, I'm prepared to be generous. More generous than a struggling operation like this deserves. $2,000. Cash money. You and your father could start fresh somewhere else. California. Maybe, I hear they're more civilized out there." I said, "The ranch isn't for sale." One of Crow's men, a scarred brute named Thompson, spat tobacco juice dangerously close to the porch steps. "Maybe the lady don't understand the situation, boss." Crow held up a hand, silencing him. "Miss Monroe understands perfectly. She's her father's daughter, after all, stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery." His eyes, cold and gray as winter sky, fixed on Leona. "But understanding and accepting are 2 different things. I'll give you and your father time to think it over. A week should be sufficient." "And if we refuse?" "Well now," Crow said, swinging back into his saddle. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. This can be a dangerous land for folks trying to go it alone. Rustlers, Indians, accidents. Why? Just last month, the Hendricks family had a terrible fire. Lost everything. His smile widened. Course, they were smart enough to accept my offer for their land the very next day. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Leona's jaw clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. Get off our land. Crow. 1 week, Miss Monroe. I'm a patient man, but even patience has its limits. He touched his hat again, that same mocking gesture, and wheeled his horse around. His men followed, whooping and laughing as they rode off, leaving another cloud of dust in their wake. Leona stayed on the porch until they were specks on the horizon, then sagged against the railing. Her hands were trembling, though whether from anger or fear, she couldn't say. Both, probably. She'd grown up hearing stories about men like Crow, but facing him down alone was different from her father's tales. The sun was touching the horizon when she finally spotted a lone rider approaching. Her relief at recognizing her father's paint mare was short-lived. Samuel Monroe was slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed to his side, even from a distance. She could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. "Papa!" Leona flew down the steps, reaching him just as he half fell from the saddle. She caught him, staggering under his weight, and helped him to the ground. "Ambushed!" he gasped, his weathered face pale beneath its tan. "3 men, wore masks, but I recognized Thompson's bay mare." Crow's men. It wasn't a question. Samuel nodded, wincing. "Caught me near the creek. Would have finished me. But I got lucky. Old skills die hard." He managed a weak smile. "Got one of them good before I lit out." Leona examined the wound. The bullet had torn through his side, and while it hadn't hit anything immediately fatal, infection was a death sentence out here without proper medicine. "We need to get you to Dr. Morrison in Red Creek." "That's a day's ride, girl." "Then we'd better get started." She helped him to his feet, supporting most of his weight. "Can you make it to the house?" Together, they stumbled inside. Leona worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best she could with whiskey and boiling water, then packing it with clean cloth. Her father bore it stoically, though she could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. "Leona," he said as she prepared supplies for the journey, "you can't go alone, not with Crow's men out there." "I won't let you die because I was too scared to ride." She checked her Colt .45, ensuring it was loaded, then added extra ammunition to her saddlebags. "That's not what I meant. You're the bravest woman I know, just like your mother was. But brave doesn't stop bullets. Neither does sitting here watching you bleed." She knelt beside his chair, taking his rough hand in hers. "I'll be careful. Papa, I'll take the back trails, ride at night. They won't expect me to head out so soon." Samuel squeezed her hand, his grip still strong despite everything. "If anything happens to you..." "It won't." She stood, slinging the saddlebags over her shoulder. "I'll be back before you know it, with Dr. Morrison and enough medicine to fix you up proper." Outside, she saddled her horse, a sturdy roan named Dusty who'd carried her through more storms than she could count. The stars were just beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. She mounted up, looking back at the house where lamplight glowed warmly in the windows. "Keep that rifle handy, Papa," she called softly. "You do the same. Girl, and Leona." She turned in the saddle. "Trust no one out there. No one." She nodded and urged Dusty into a trot, heading not for the main road, but for the narrow trails that wound through the Badlands. These paths were treacherous in daylight and near suicidal at night, but they'd keep her away from watching eyes. An hour into her journey, the moon rose full and bright, casting strange shadows among the rocks and scrub. Every sound made her tense, the cry of a coyote, the rustle of wind through dry grass, the creak of leather as Dusty picked his way along the trail. She was so focused on the path ahead that she almost missed the sound of horses behind her. Almost. Growing up on the frontier had taught her to trust her instincts. And right now, every instinct screamed danger. Leona guided Dusty off the trail, into a cluster of boulders. She dismounted, keeping one hand on the horse's muzzle to keep him quiet, the other on her colt. The hoofbeats grew louder. Two riders, moving fast but cautiously, like men tracking prey. Said she'd probably take the back trails. One voice carried on the still air. Smart little thing, according to the boss. Smart don't mean much if we catch her. Another replied. Crow wants her old man agreeable. Nothing makes a man agreeable like having his daughter as a guest. Rage flared in Leona's chest, hot and bright. They meant to use her as leverage. She pressed herself against the rocks, watching as the two men passed within yards of her hiding spot. Let them go, the rational part of her mind urged. Your father needs that medicine. But as they moved past, she caught sight of one rider's profile in the moonlight. Thompson, the man who'd helped ambush her father. Her finger tightened on the trigger. That's when Dusty, usually steady as stone, chose to shift nervously. His hoof struck a loose rock, sending it clattering down the slope. Both riders wheeled around immediately. There! Thompson shouted, spurring his horse toward the boulders. Leona didn't think. She swung into the saddle and gave Dusty his head, bursting from cover at full gallop. Gunfire erupted behind her, bullets whining past like angry hornets. She bent low over Dusty's neck, urging him faster. The trail ahead forked. Left led deeper into the Badlands, a maze of canyons and dead ends. Right would eventually curve back toward the main road. She chose left, praying she remembered the paths from her childhood explorations. More gunfire! Closer now! A bullet tugged at her sleeve. Dusty stumbled, caught himself, kept running. Good horse, the best horse. The canyon walls closed in, and suddenly she realized her mistake. This particular branch ended in a box canyon, sheer walls on three sides. Her father had warned her about it years ago. Death trap, he'd called it. Only one way in, one way out. She could hear the pursuit closing in. Options raced through her mind, each worse than the last. Stand and fight two armed men against one woman low on ammunition. Try to climb out. The walls were too steep, too loose. That's when she saw him. A lone figure on horseback, silhouetted against the canyon wall. He sat motionless, watching her approach with the stillness of a predator. Caught between the unknown rider ahead and certain capture behind, Leona made her choice. She rode straight toward the stranger. As she drew closer, moonlight revealed details. Tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing a long duster that had seen better days. A week's worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and his hat was pulled low, shadowing his features. But it was the way he held himself that caught her attention, relaxed but ready, like a compressed spring. "Help me!" she gasped as she pulled Dusty to a sliding stop. "Please!" The stranger's head tilted slightly. When he spoke, his voice was low, gravelly, carrying the hint of places far from Texas. "Seems you've got yourself in a predicament, miss." The sound of approaching hooves echoed off the canyon walls. No time for negotiation or explanation. "They're trying to kidnap me. My father's dying. I need to get to Red Creek." The words tumbled out in a rush. Something shifted in the stranger's posture. He drew his revolver in one fluid motion, not the desperate grab of an amateur, but the practiced draw of a man intimate with violence. "Get behind those rocks," he said, nodding toward a pile of fallen boulders. "Keep your head down." Leona didn't argue. She guided Dusty behind cover just as Thompson and his partner rounded the corner, guns drawn. "Well, well," Thompson called out, pulling up short at the sight of the stranger. "Don't believe we've met. Friend, this ain't your concern." "Funny thing about concerns," the stranger replied. "They have a way of finding me whether I want them or not." Thompson's partner, a thin man with nervous eyes, whispered something urgently. Thompson's expression changed, a mix of recognition and wariness. Kane, Ethan Kane. The stranger, Kane, didn't confirm or deny. He simply sat there, revolver held casually but ready. "There's a price on your head," Thompson continued, though some of his earlier confidence had evaporated. $500, last I heard. $700, Kane corrected mildly. "They raised it after Tucson. 2 against 1. Those aren't good odds, even for you." Kane's smile was barely visible in the shadows beneath his hat brim. "You're right. Hardly seems fair." He paused. "To you." The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Leona held her breath, her own gun ready, but knowing any move she made might spark the violence hovering in the air. It was the nervous partner who broke first. His hand twitched toward his holster, and the night exploded. Kane's gun spoke twice, so fast the reports almost blended into one. The nervous man tumbled from his saddle. Thompson, to his credit, managed to clear leather, but Kane's third shot sent his gun spinning into the darkness. Thompson clutched his bleeding hand, cursing. "You've got 2 choices," Kane said, his voice still conversationally calm. "Ride out now and keep riding, or join your friend in whatever comes after this life. Choose quick, my patients died somewhere outside Abilene." Thompson didn't need to be told twice. He gathered his partner's horse and spurred away, cradling his wounded hand. Kane waited until the hoofbeats faded before turning to where Leona crouched. "You can come out now, miss." Leona emerged slowly, leading Dusty. Her legs felt unsteady, adrenaline leaving her shaky. Thank you. Thank you." "Red Creek's a hard day's ride from here." Kane holstered his gun with the same fluid grace he'd drawn it. "Harder still with Crow's men looking for you." "You know about Crow?" "I know men like him. Known them all my life." He studied her in the moonlight. "You said your father's dying." "Shot! He needs a doctor! Medicine!" The weight of it all suddenly crashed down on her. Her father bleeding back home. Crow's ultimatum. The violence that had just erupted around her. She steadied herself against Dusty's warm shoulder. Kane was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the dust of 1,000 miles. "I'm headed that direction anyway. Might as well have company." "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." He turned his horse, looking back over his shoulder. The moonlight caught his eyes, gray-blue, like winter sky over distant mountains. "Maybe I'm tired of riding alone," he said, "or maybe I just don't like bullies. Does it matter?" Leona thought about her father's warning to trust no one. Then she thought about the alternative, trying to reach Red Creek alone with Crow's men hunting her. This Ethan Kane was clearly dangerous, clearly running from something, but he'd risked himself for a stranger. And right now, that made him the closest thing to an ally she had. "I suppose it doesn't," she said, swinging back into the saddle. As they rode out of the Box Canyon together, Leona couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn onto a path she couldn't yet see the end of. Behind them lay everything safe and known. Ahead waited the uncertainty of the trail, the danger of pursuit, and the company of a man who drew his gun like death itself. But her father needed medicine, and she'd ride with the devil himself to get it. The moon climbed higher as they made their way into the Badlands. 2 unlikely companions bound by necessity and the harsh mathematics of survival that ruled the frontier. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new choices. Tonight, she just had to stay alive. The first pale fingers of dawn were stretching across the Texas sky when Leona finally allowed herself to speak. They'd been riding in silence for hours, picking their way through narrow trails that wound between towering mesas and across dried creek beds. Ethan Kane rode slightly ahead, his posture relaxed but alert, like a wolf that never truly sleeps. "We need to stop soon," she said, her voice hoarse from the dust. "The horses need water." Kane nodded without turning. There's a spring about 2 miles ahead. Hidden. Most folks don't know about it. How do you know about it? I make it my business to know things. He glanced back at her, and in the growing light, she got her first clear look at his face. Weathered but not old, maybe 30, 35. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, pale against sun-darkened skin. His eyes were indeed gray-blue, holding depth she couldn't read. "You've been through here before," she said. It wasn't a question. Once or twice. They rode in silence again until the spring appeared, just as he'd said. A small pool of clear water hidden behind a cluster of cottonwoods, fed by an underground source. The horses drank gratefully while Leona refilled their canteens. "We can rest here for an hour," Kane said, loosening his horse's girth. "No more. Crow's men will have found Thompson by now. They'll be tracking us come full light." Leona splashed water on her face, washing away the dust and dried sweat. The cool water felt like heaven against her skin. When she looked up, Kane was watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" "Nothing." He turned away, digging into his saddlebags. "Just thinking you don't look like someone who should be mixed up with the likes of Jedediah Crow." "Nobody should be mixed up with Crow," she replied, accepting the piece of jerky he offered. "But we don't always get to choose our troubles." True enough. He settled against a cottonwood trunk, hat tipped forward. "So what's his interest in your ranch? Can't be the cattle 100 head isn't worth his time." "Water rights," Leona said. "Our land has access to Willow Creek year-round. In drought years, that's worth more than gold." "Smart. Control the water. Control the range." Kane chewed thoughtfully. "Your father won't sell." "My father would die before letting Crow take what my mother loved." The words came out fiercer than she intended. "That land is all we have left of her." Kane studied her for a long moment. "Been there, losing someone. Changes you." "Did you lose someone?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We should move soon." But Leona wasn't ready to let it go. Something about this man intrigued her. The contradiction between his violent capability and the gentleness with which he handled his horse. The way he'd risked himself for a stranger. "Ethan Kane," she said slowly. "I've heard that name. You were at Antietam. They say you saved your whole regiment, held a bridge against—" "They say a lot of things." His voice had gone flat. Cold. "Most of them are lies. And Tucson, what Thompson mentioned." Kane stood abruptly, moving to check his horse. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who needed help. I'm riding alone with a wanted man through hostile territory. I think I'm entitled to a few questions." He turned to face her, and for a moment, she saw something raw in his eyes, pain, anger, maybe both. Then his expression smoothed into that unreadable mask. "Fair enough. Yes, I was at Antietam. Yes, I held a bridge. My unit was supposed to retreat, but the courier got shot. By the time I realized we were alone, it was too late. 23 men died because I followed orders that were already changed. That's your hero, Miss Monroe." The bitterness in his voice was sharp as alkali water. Leona felt suddenly ashamed of her prying. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "After the war, I couldn't adjust. Kept seeing those boys' faces. Started drinking, taking jobs I shouldn't have. Scouting for the army again, tracking Apache. Led a unit into an ambush near Tucson. More dead men on my conscience. I deserted rather than face another court-martial." He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "So now you know. Still want to ride with me?" Leona stood, brushing dust from her split skirt. "My father needs medicine. Right now, I'd ride with the devil himself if it got me to Red Creek." Something shifted in Kane's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You might be doing just that, Miss Monroe." They mounted up as the sun climbed higher. casting long shadows across the broken landscape. The trail ahead wound through increasingly rough country, all red rock and thorny scrub. Kane led them off the main path repeatedly, following game trails and dried washes that seemed to lead nowhere but somehow always emerged closer to their destination. By midday, the heat was brutal. Waves of it shimmered off the rocks, creating phantom lakes in the distance. Leona had long since given up trying to stay properly ladylike in her appearance. Her hair hung limp beneath her hat, and her shirt clung damply to her back. "There!" Kane said suddenly, pointing to a dust cloud on the horizon. "Riders! Moving fast!" Leona shaded her eyes. "How many?" "6, maybe 7. He studied the terrain with the eye of a tactician. "They're pushing too hard in this heat. Horses will founder if they keep that pace. What do? We get creative." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Ever play hide-and-seek as a child, Miss Monroe?" Before she could answer, he was leading them up a steep slope toward a maze of wind-carved rock formations. The horses scrambled for purchase on the loose stone, but Kane picked a path with uncanny skill. They emerged onto a narrow ledge that wound between towering spires of red rock. Below, Leona could see the trail they'd been following stretching like a snake across the desert floor. "We wait," Kane said, dismounting. He pulled a rifle from his saddle scabbard, a well-maintained Spencer repeater. "Let them pass, then we double back. Take a different route. And if they don't pass, then things get interesting." They didn't have long to wait. The riders appeared below, spreading out as they searched for tracks. Leona recognized several of them. Crow's men, led by a half-breed tracker named Moses Dick. "Good tracker," Kane murmured. "Learn from the Apache. This might be closer than I'd like." Indeed, Dick had dismounted, studying the ground intently. He pointed up the slope, directly toward their hiding spot. The other riders began to spread out, preparing to climb. Kane handed Leona his rifle. "You know how to use this." "I can shoot." "Good. When I give the signal, put a round into that boulder down there, the one shaped like a buffalo head. Then get ready to ride hard." "What are you going to do?" But he was already moving, silent as smoke, disappearing among the rocks. Leona gripped the rifle, her heart pounding. Below, the riders had started up the slope. A whistle, sharp and clear, like a hawk's cry. The signal. Leona fired, the Spencer's report echoing off the canyon walls. The bullet struck the buffalo head boulder, sending a shower of rock chips flying. The riders shouted, wheeling toward the sound. That's when Kane struck. He appeared behind one of the rear riders like a ghost, yanking the man from his saddle. Before the others could react, he'd vaulted onto the horse and was racing along the lower trail, heading back the way they'd come. "After him!" Dick shouted, and 5 of the 6 pursuers wheeled their horses around, giving chase. Leona didn't wait to see more. She mounted Dusty and picked her way quickly down the far side of the slope, following the escape route Kane had pointed out earlier. Her hands shook slightly as she rode, the adrenaline making her feel lightheaded. She'd covered maybe 3 miles when hoofbeats approached from behind. She turned, rifle ready, then sagged with relief as Kane appeared on a lathered horse, not the one he'd stolen. She noticed. "Lost them in Skeleton Canyon," he said, pulling alongside her. "But they'll figure out the trick soon enough. We need distance." They pushed hard through the afternoon, stopping only to rest the horses briefly. The landscape gradually changed, mesa giving way to rolling hills dotted with cedar and pinon pine. Signs of civilization began to appear, a distant ranch house, fence lines, the narrow track of a freight road. "Red Creek's maybe 6 hours ahead," Kane said as they paused at the top of a rise. "We could make it by midnight if we push." "The horses are exhausted, so are we." He nodded reluctantly. "There's a way station about 2 miles north. Widow named Mrs. Hutchins runs it. She doesn't ask questions if the money's good." The way station proved to be a modest adobe building with a small corral and a well. Mrs. Hutchins, a stern-faced woman of perhaps 50, greeted them with a shotgun and suspicious eyes. "We need rest and grain for the horses," Kane said, producing silver coins. "And silence." Mrs. Hutchins studied them both, her gaze lingering on Leona's disheveled appearance and the rifle she carried. Then she looked at the coins. "Stables around back. Supper's at 7. You'll be gone by dawn." It wasn't a question. The stable was clean and well-maintained. Leona tended to Dusty while Kane saw to both their mounts with practiced efficiency. She watched him work, noting the care he took despite his own obvious exhaustion. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone. Harder, meaner." He paused in his brushing. "Give it time. Miss Monroe, you haven't seen me on a bad day yet." Supper was a quiet affair. Beans, cornbread, and strong coffee served in the station's small common room. 2 other travelers were present, a drummer selling patent medicines and a surveyor heading to El Paso. Both men tried to engage Leona in conversation, but Kane's steady stare discouraged their advances. "Your husband doesn't talk much," the drummer observed, apparently assuming their relationship. "He speaks when he has something worth saying," Leona replied, not bothering to correct the assumption. Later, Mrs. Hutchins showed them to a small room with 2 narrow beds. "Only room I've got," she said firmly. "Take it or sleep in the stable." When the door closed behind her, Leona felt suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation. She'd been so focused on reaching Red Creek, on saving her father, that she hadn't considered the social implications of traveling alone with a man. "I'll sleep in the stable," Kane said, apparently reading her thoughts. "Don't be ridiculous. We're both exhausted. I trust you to be a gentleman." He gave her an odd look. "That's a lot of trust to place in a man you met last night. You could have left me to Thompson. You could have taken my horse, my money. You've had plenty of chances to prove yourself untrustworthy." She sat on one of the beds, suddenly so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. "Besides, my reputation is probably already ruined just by being here. Might as well get some sleep out of it." Kane shook his head but said nothing. He pulled off his boots and lay down fully clothed, his gun belt still buckled. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Leona lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling, through the thin walls. She could hear the drummer snoring and the distant cry of coyotes. Her father was out there somewhere, wounded and alone, trusting her to bring help. Crow was out there too, with his men and his threats. And here she was, sharing a room with a deserter and killer who'd shown her more kindness in 12 hours than she'd expected. The world had become very complicated very quickly. She thought about Kane's story, about Antietam and the bridge. 23 men dead because of crossed orders and bad timing. She wondered if he saw their faces when he closed his eyes. If that was why he'd learned to sleep so lightly, always ready for trouble. "Miss Monroe." His voice was quiet in the darkness. "Yes. Whatever happens tomorrow, stay close. Red Creek isn't as civilized as it pretends to be, and Crow has influence there." "I'll be careful." "Being careful isn't always enough." A pause. "But you already know that, don't you?" She thought about her mother's grave, about her father's wound, about the wild ride through the night. "Yes, I suppose I do." "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Leona closed her eyes, listening to the night sounds. Somewhere in the distance, a screech owl called, its cry like a woman's scream. It seemed like an omen, though of what she couldn't say. Tomorrow, they'd reach Red Creek. Tomorrow, she'd find the doctor and medicine her father needed. Tomorrow, she'd have to figure out how to get back home through Crow's men. But tonight, for just these few hours, she was safe. It was a relative safety, sharing a room with a dangerous man in a way station at the edge of nowhere. But after the day she'd had, it was enough. She fell asleep to the sound of Kane's steady breathing, her hand resting on the Colt at her side, ready for whatever morning might bring. They left the way station before dawn, riding out under stars that seemed close enough to touch. The air was cool and crisp, a blessed relief from the previous day's heat. Neither spoke as they navigated the darkened trail, but Leona found the silence companionable rather than awkward. As the sun rose, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, they paused atop a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of broken country. Kane dismounted to check his horse's hooves, and Leona took the opportunity to stretch her aching muscles. "How far to Red Creek?" she asked. 3 hours, maybe 4. He straightened, his expression thoughtful. "We should talk about what happens when we get there." "I find Dr. Morrison, get the medicine, and head back." "It won't be that simple." Kane pulled a wanted poster from his saddlebag and handed it to her. His own face stared back. Younger, clean-shaven, but unmistakably him. $700 is a lot of money. Someone's bound to recognize me. "Then why are you going?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I'm tired of running. Maybe I just couldn't leave a woman to face Crow's men alone." He took the poster back, folding it carefully. "Either way, we need a plan." They rode on as the morning warmed, discussing possibilities. Leona would enter town first, alone. Kane would wait at an abandoned homestead on the outskirts. If she wasn't back by nightfall, he'd assume the worst and act accordingly. "What does act accordingly mean?" Leona asked. "Better you don't know." They were perhaps an hour from their destination when Kane suddenly pulled up short, holding up a hand for silence. Leona listened, hearing nothing but the wind through the cedar branches. "What is it?" "Something's wrong." He studied the trail ahead, then the ridgelines on either side. Too quiet, no birds. That's when Leona heard it, the faint jingle of spurs from somewhere among the rocks to their left. Kane was already moving, spurring his horse off the trail and into a grove of cottonwoods. Leona followed, her heart hammering. They dismounted quickly, and Kane handed her his rifle. "If shooting starts, you run. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just run." "I'm not leaving you." "This isn't a debate, Miss Monroe." Before she could argue further, riders emerged from concealment on both sides of the trail. Not Crow's men this time. These wore badges. A posse. 6 men with the hard-eyed look of professional manhunters. Ethan Kane, the leader, a tall man with a marshal's star on his vest, called out, "We know you're in there. Come out with your hands high, and nobody needs to get hurt." Kane stepped out from the trees, hands visible but not raised. "Marshal Briggs. Been a while." 2 years. Briggs kept his hand near his gun. "You led us a merry chase after Tucson." "I was motivated." "Well, now I'm motivated. $700 motivated." Briggs's eyes flicked to where Leona remained hidden. "Why don't you have your friend come out too? No sense in anyone getting shot over a misunderstanding." Kane glanced back, and Leona saw him make a decision. "She's not part of this. Let her go, and I'll come quietly." "Can't do that. She's been riding with a wanted man. That makes her my business too." Leona stepped out, the rifle held loosely but ready. "I hired Mr. Kane as a guide. I didn't know about any warrant." Briggs smiled thinly. "Ma'am, that rifle says different. Besides, Moses Dick tracked you both from the Monroe place. We know about the shooting there." "Self-defense," Kane said. "Check with Thompson if you doubt it. He'll have a bullet wound in his gun hand." "Maybe so, but that's for a judge to decide." Briggs shifted slightly, and Leona noticed the other posse members spreading out, improving their angles. "Now, we can do this easy or hard. Your choice, Kane." The tension stretched taut. Leona counted heartbeats, wondering if she was about to witness or participate in a gunfight. Her finger found the rifle's trigger. Then Kane smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "Tell you what, Briggs, how about we make this interesting?" "I'm listening." "You still carry that deck of cards, the one you used to fleece soldiers with back at Fort Grant?" Briggs' eyes narrowed. "Maybe. One hand of poker, I win. You let the lady go on her way. You win. I come along peaceful as a lamb." "And if you lose?" "Then you get your $700 without a fight. But she goes free either way." One of the posse members, a younger man with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Marshal, we don't need to—" "Quiet, Templeton." Briggs studied Kane. "You always were a gambling man. All right, one hand. But we do it here. Now, where my men can watch." They dismounted, and Briggs produced a worn deck from his saddlebag. The two men sat cross-legged in the dirt, while the posse formed a loose circle around them. Leona stood to one side, the rifle still in her hands, acutely aware of the surreal nature of the moment. "5-card draw," Briggs said, shuffling with practiced ease. "No wild cards, no funny business. Wouldn't dream of it." The cards were dealt. Leona watched Kane's face, searching for any tell, any sign of what he held. His expression remained perfectly neutral as he studied his hand. "I'll take 2, Kane said, discarding. 3 for me." Briggs made his exchange, and Leona caught the slightest tightening around his eyes. A bad draw, perhaps. "Well," Briggs asked. Kane laid down his cards. "Pair of 7s. For a moment, Leona's heart sank. A pair of 7s was nearly nothing. Then Briggs cursed and threw down his hand ace high. Not even a pair. "Looks like the lady goes free," Kane said mildly. Briggs stood abruptly. "Get her out of here. You've got 5 minutes before I change my mind." Kane walked Leona to her horse, speaking quietly. "Remember what we discussed. Get the medicine and get out. Don't try anything heroic." "What about you?" "I'll figure something out. I always do." He helped her mount, his hands lingering for just a moment on hers. "Your father's lucky to have a daughter like you, Miss Monroe." "Leona," she said. "My name is Leona." "Leona." He smiled again, that rare, transforming expression. "Now ride, and don't look back." She wanted to say something more, to thank him or argue or something. But Briggs was already calling for Kane to mount up, so she simply nodded and spurred Dusty toward Red Creek, leaving Kane to face whatever justice awaited him. The town appeared an hour later, rising from the prairie like a collection of sun-bleached bones. Red Creek was larger than most frontier settlements, boasting 2 hotels, 3 saloons, and actual boardwalks along the main street. But prosperity hadn't brought civilization. Leona could feel the undercurrent of barely contained violence the moment she rode in. Dr. Morrison's office was easy to find, marked by a shingle depicting a mortar and pestle. Leona tied Dusty to the hitching post and climbed the outside stairs to the second-floor office. The doctor himself answered her knock, a thin, elderly man with gentle eyes behind wire spectacles. "Yes, my dear, how can I help you?" Leona quickly explained about her father's wound. Morrison listened with professional attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Gunshot to the side, you say, and this happened 2 days ago." He shook his head. "We'll need carbolic acid for cleaning, laudanum for the pain, and proper bandages. I'll prepare a kit." "How much?" $20 should cover it." Leona had brought 30, her family's entire savings. She counted out the bills while Morrison assembled supplies in a leather medical bag. "Your father's fortunate," the doctor said, handing her the bag. "Most wouldn't make the ride you've made for help. You're Samuel Monroe's daughter, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." "I thought so. You have your mother's eyes." His expression grew somber. "I heard about the trouble with Jedediah Crow. Ugly business." "You know about that?" "Everyone knows. Crow's been expanding his holdings for months. Your father's not the first to resist, though he may be the most stubborn. Morrison glanced toward the window. Speaking of which, you might want to leave by the back stairs. Some of the Crow's men just rode in. Leona's blood ran cold. She peered through the curtain and saw them, 5 riders, dusty and hard-faced, tying up at the saloon across the street. Moses Dick was among them. "Go," Morrison urged. "Quickly now." She grabbed the medical bag and slipped out the back, keeping to the alleys as she made her way to where Dusty waited. She'd nearly reached him when a familiar voice made her freeze. Well, Miss Monroe." She turned slowly. Moses Dick stood at the alley mouth, smiling unpleasantly. He wasn't alone. 2 more of Crow's men flanked him. "Mr. Dick," she managed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Heard you gave my boys quite a chase yesterday. Even picked up some help along the way." His dark eyes glittered. "Where's Kane now?" "I don't know what you mean." "Now, that's disappointing. Here I thought we could have a civilized conversation." He took a step closer. "See, Mr. Crow is mighty upset about his offer being ignored. Seems your daddy needs another lesson in manners." "My father's dying," Leona said. "Isn't that enough?" "Dying?" Dick's smile widened. "Well, that does change things. Dead men can't sign bills of sale. Guess we'll need you to convince him while he's still breathing." The other men started forward, and Leona realized with crystal clarity that she was trapped. The medical bag in her hand felt impossibly heavy. Her gun was on her saddle, 20 feet away. That's when she remembered Kane's rifle, still in her possession, leaning against the wall where she'd set it while talking to Morrison, moving as casually as she could. She shifted toward it. "Now, don't be doing anything foolish," Dick warned. "Hey, you mean like this?" Leona grabbed the rifle and levered around into the chamber in one smooth motion. The men stopped, suddenly wary. 3 against 1 were good odds in a fist fight, less appealing when facing a Spencer repeater. "You won't shoot," Dick said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Yesterday morning, I wouldn't have," Leona admitted, "but that was before you ambushed my father, before you hunted me like an animal. A lot can change in 2 days. Mr. Dick." "Boss wants you alive," one of the other men said nervously. "Maybe we should—" "Shut up," Dick snapped. Then, to Leona, "You can't watch all of us at once, girl." "No," she agreed. "But I can sure as hell take you with me." The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air like heat lightning. Leona's hands were steady on the rifle, but she knew Dick was right. Eventually, someone would make a move, and she couldn't cover all the angles. That's when she heard it, the low, rumbling growl of thunder, but the sky was clear. "No, not thunder. Hoofbeats, many of them, approaching fast." Dick heard it too. His head turned slightly, and in that moment of distraction, Leona acted. She fired, not at Dick but at the water barrel beside him. It exploded in a shower of splinters and spray, causing all 3 men to dive for cover. Leona ran for Dusty, throwing herself into the saddle as the hoofbeats grew louder. She spurred hard down the alley, the medical bag clutched tight, as shouts erupted behind her. She burst onto Main Street just as a dozen riders thundered past, Marshal Briggs and his posse, with several more men wearing deputy badges. And in their midst, hands manacled but still mounted, rode Ethan Kane. Their eyes met for one electric moment. Kane's expression flickered. Surprise, concern, something else she couldn't name. Then he did something that made no sense. He smiled and jerked his head sharply to the left. Leona didn't question. She yanked Dusty's reins, veering left down a side street as more of Crow's men poured from the saloon. The last thing she saw was Kane somehow producing a concealed derringer from his boot, the tiny gun spitting fire as chaos erupted on Main Street. She rode hard, trusting Kane's direction, and found herself on a narrow trail leading into the Badlands. Behind her, Red Creek exploded with gunfire and shouting. Whatever Kane had done, he'd given her the distraction she needed. 2 miles out, she stopped to let Dusty breathe and looked back. Smoke rose from the town. Something was burning. She thought of Kane, manacled and outnumbered, and felt something twist in her chest. But her father was dying, and she had the medicine. Whatever debt she owed Ethan Kane would have to wait. She turned Dusty toward home and rode into the gathering dusk, the medical bag secure and her heart heavy with the weight of choices made and unmade. Behind her, Red Creek burned, and somewhere in that chaos was a man who'd risked everything for a stranger. The stars were just appearing when she finally allowed herself to whisper a prayer, not for herself or even her father, but for a deserter with sad eyes and gentle hands who'd reminded her that even in this harsh land, kindness could still bloom like a desert flower after rain. Tomorrow, she'd face whatever came next. Tonight, she rode through darkness toward home, carrying medicine and hope in equal measure, while somewhere behind her, a good man faced bad odds with a gambler's smile. The moon was high when Leona finally stopped to rest. She'd been riding hard for hours, pushing Dusty to his limits, driven by the urgent need to reach her father with the medicine. But even desperation couldn't overcome the basic needs of flesh and blood. Both she and her horse were exhausted. She found shelter in a grove of mesquite trees near a dried creek bed, their twisted branches offering concealment from anyone following. As she dismounted, her legs nearly buckled. When had she last eaten a proper meal? When had she last truly slept? Dusty drank gratefully from her canteen while she checked the medical bag for the dozenth time. Everything was still there: carbolic acid, laudanum, clean bandages, and other supplies Dr. Morrison had included. $20 worth of hope. She was just about to remount when she heard them horses approaching from the east, moving fast but carefully. Her blood froze. Crow's men? Had to be. Who else would be riding these trails at night? Leona grabbed Kane's rifle and melted into the shadows, positioning herself behind a thick mesquite trunk. The riders grew closer, and she counted at least 4, maybe 5. Too many to fight, too many to outrun on a tired horse. The first rider appeared in the moonlight, and Leona's finger tightened on the trigger. Then she recognized the stocky build and distinctive hat. Moses Dick, the half-breed tracker, had found her trail despite her efforts to hide it. "She stopped here," Dick called to the others. "Horse tracks by the trees. Still fresh." "You sure it's her?" another voice asked. "Could be anyone." "It's her. Same horse, same weight distribution. The Monroe girls may be an hour ahead." Leona held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. If they searched the grove thoroughly, they'd find her. She had maybe 6 rounds left in the Spencer, her Colt with 5 more. Not enough. Not nearly enough. "Boss wants her alive." One of the men reminded the others, "No shooting unless necessary." "Define necessary," someone muttered, earning harsh laughter from the group. They were spreading out now, beginning a systematic search. Leona watched Dick dismount and kneel by Dusty's tracks, reading the ground like others might read a book. Any moment now, he'd realize the tracks didn't continue out the other side of the grove. That's when she made her decision. If she was going down, she'd take some of them with her. Her father had taught her that surrender to men like these meant worse than death. She sighted down the rifle barrel, picking Dick as her first target, the tracker who'd helped ambush her father, who'd hunted her like an animal. There was justice in it. Her finger was tightening on the trigger when gunfire erupted from the darkness, but not from her rifle. The shot came from behind Crow's men, dropping one from his saddle. Then another shot, and another, so fast they seemed to blur together. "Ambush!" someone screamed. The night exploded into chaos. Crow's men wheeled their horses, firing wildly into the darkness. Muzzle flashes lit up like deadly fireflies. Horses screamed. Men cursed and shouted. Through it all, Leona caught glimpses of a single rider weaving through the enemy like a ghost, his gun speaking with deadly precision. Even in the chaos, she recognized the fluid grace, the economy of movement. Kane, somehow, impossibly. Ethan Kane. Dick was shouting orders, trying to rally his scattered men, when Kane materialized behind him. The tracker spun, raising his pistol, but Kane was faster. His gun bucked once, and Dick toppled backward, clutching his shoulder. "That's for the Monroe Ranch," Kane said, his voice carrying clearly through the night. The remaining men broke, spurring their horses into the darkness. Kane let them go, turning instead toward the grove where Leona hid. She stepped out slowly, hardly believing what she'd witnessed. "How?" was all she could manage. Kane dismounted, and she saw he was favoring his left arm. Blood darkened his sleeve. Turns out Marshal Briggs has a weakness for cards and whiskey, especially whiskey. His deputies got careless after the third bottle. "You escaped." "More or less." He swayed slightly, and Leona rushed forward to steady him. "Though I might have upset some folks in the process. There's a reason Red Creek was burning when you left." "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Dick winged me during the festivities." He looked past her to where Moses Dick lay groaning in the dirt. Speaking of which, Kane walked over to the wounded tracker, who glared up at him with pain-filled eyes. "You're a hard man to kill, Kane." "So I'm told." Kane knelt beside him, checking the wound. "You'll live. Shoulders torn up, but the bone's intact. You can make it back to town if you don't bleed out first." "Why not finish it?" Kane was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm tired of killing. Because someone recently reminded me there might be another way." He stood. "You tell Crow that Leona Monroe is under my protection now. He wants her. He goes through me." "You're one man," Dick spat. "Crow has 20. Then he'd better bring them all." Kane turned back to Leona. "We need to go. The ones who ran will bring reinforcements." They mounted quickly, Kane gritting his teeth as he pulled himself into the saddle. Leona noticed he'd acquired a new horse, a magnificent black stallion that looked like it could run forever. "Marshal Briggs's prize thoroughbred," Kane explained, catching her look. "Figured he owed me for the inconvenience." They rode through what remained of the night, pushing as hard as they dared. Kane led them along game trails and through washes Leona hadn't even known existed. Despite his wound, he never faltered, though she could see the pain etched in the tight lines around his mouth. Dawn was breaking when they finally stopped at a hidden spring to water the horses and rest. Leona insisted on examining Kane's arm, ignoring his protests. "The bullet's still in there," she said after carefully probing the wound. "I know. It needs to come out." "I know that too." He met her eyes. "You ever dig a bullet out of a man before?" "No, but I watched Dr. Morrison do it once, and I've got his supplies." She tried to project more confidence than she felt. "I can do it." Kane studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." She had him sit with his back against a boulder while she prepared. The carbolic acid would clean the wound. The laudanum would help with pain. She sterilized her knife in the flame of a sulfur match, her hands remarkably steady. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Can't be worse than Antietam," he said, then bit down on a piece of leather as she began. It was worse than she'd imagined. Blood welled as she probed for the bullet, and Kane's whole body went rigid, but he never made a sound, never pulled away. She found the lead ball lodged against bone and carefully worked it free, then cleaned and bandaged the wound with Dr. Morrison's supplies. "There," she said, sitting back on her heels. Her hands were covered in blood, and she felt light-headed. "That's the best I can do." Kane's face was gray with pain, but he managed a weak smile. "You'd make a fair surgeon, Leona Monroe." "I'd rather not make a habit of it." She helped him into a clean shirt from his saddlebags. "Why did you come after me? You were free." He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, you ever done something that haunted you? Something that changed who you thought you were? No. I have too many times. Each one carved away a piece of what made me human. He looked at her with those winter sky eyes. But helping you, keeping you safe. It felt like maybe I was putting a piece back. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Leona felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the rising sun. We should go, she said softly. Papa needs this medicine. They rode on through the morning, the landscape becoming familiar as they neared Monroe Land. Leona's heart lifted at the sight of landmarks she'd known since childhood. The Twin Peaks called Devil's Horns, the stand of cottonwoods marking the eastern boundary of their range. But as they crested the final rise overlooking the ranch, her relief turned to ice. Smoke rose from where the barn should be. As they drew closer, she could see it had been burned to the ground, only blackened timbers remaining. Papa! She spurred Dusty into a gallop, Kane close behind. The house still stood, but bullet holes pocked its walls. The front door hung askew on its hinges. Leona burst inside, her heart in her throat. In here, girl! Her father's voice, weak but alive, came from the back room. She found him propped in bed, rifle across his lap, looking haggard but alert. Papa! She dropped to her knees beside the bed, taking his hand. I have the medicine. Everything's going to be... Crow's men came yesterday. Samuel interrupted. Burned the barn, shot up the place. I held them off, but... He noticed Kane in the doorway, and his grip tightened on the rifle. Who's this? A friend, Leona said quickly. He saved my life, several times. Samuel studied Kane with sharp eyes that missed nothing, the controlled way he moved. The well-worn gun belt, the fresh bandage on his arm. You'd be Ethan Kane. Yes, sir. Heard about you. Some of it might even be true. Samuel's gaze shifted back to his daughter. You trust him? With my life. Then I suppose that's good enough for now. He winced as Leona began cleaning his wound with the carbolic acid. Though you might want to explain why you brought a wanted man to my home. The same reason she rode alone through Crow's territory. Kane said from the doorway. Because sometimes the law and what's right aren't the same thing. Samuel laughed, though it turned into a cough. Spoken like a man who's lived it. All right, Mr. Kane, you protected my daughter. That earns you a meal and a bed, at least until I'm strong enough to throw you out myself. Over the next hours, Leona worked to clean and properly dress her father's wounds. The medicine doctor Morrison had provided was already helping. Samuel's color improved, and the angry red streaks that had been spreading from the wound began to fade. Kane, meanwhile, had taken up position by the window, watching the approaches to the ranch. They'll be back, he said quietly. Crow won't give up now. He's invested too much. Let them come, Samuel said. This is my land. My wife is buried on that hill. I'll die before I let Jedediah Crow take it. Might not have to, Kane mused. How many neighbors you got who feel the same about Crow? A few, the Hendricks boys, even after losing their place. Old Tom Washington, the Ramirez family. Samuel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You're thinking we make a stand together. I'm thinking Crows used to picking off families one at a time. Might be different if folks stood together. Leona looked between the two men, seeing a plan taking shape. It's dangerous. Crow has a lot of men. So did the Confederate Army. Kane said dryly. Numbers aren't everything. As the sun climbed toward noon, they made their plans. Samuel would send riders to the neighboring ranches. Kane would scout Crow's positions and strength. Leona would prepare the house for siege boarding windows, stockpiling ammunition, filling every container with water. One more thing, Kane said as he prepared to ride out. Crow's going to know I'm here. My presence makes you a bigger target. You saved my daughter, Samuel said firmly. That makes you family. Warrant or no warrant, we stand together." Kane looked surprised. Then something deeper moved, perhaps. He touched his hat brim and headed for the door, pausing only when Leona called his name. "Be careful," she said. "Always am," but his smile said otherwise. As she watched him ride away, Leona realized how much had changed in just 3 days. She'd left home a frightened girl trying to save her father. She'd returned a woman who'd faced death, dealt it out when necessary, and found something unexpected in the eyes of a haunted stranger. The barn still smoldered, and danger circled like buzzards. But for the first time since this began, Leona felt they had a chance. Not just to survive, but to win. To build something better from the ashes of what Crow was trying to destroy. She thought of Kane's words about putting pieces of humanity back. Maybe that's what they were all doing, building something human in a land that seemed determined to strip it away. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky was clear. Leona checked her rifle and went back inside to prepare for whatever storm was coming. This time, she wouldn't face it alone. Red Creek was different in daylight, where darkness had hidden the town's rough edges. Sunlight exposed them mercilessly. Unpainted buildings already weathering gray. Streets rutted deep by wagon wheels, and everywhere the sense of a place balanced on a knife's edge between civilization and chaos. Kane had been gone for 2 days, scouting Crow's positions, and Leona had finally convinced her father that someone needed to return to town for more medical supplies. The carbolic acid was running low, and Samuel, despite his protests, still needed careful tending. "I don't like it," Samuel said for the 3rd time as Leona prepared to leave. "Not with Crow's men everywhere. They won't expect me to return to Red Creek so soon." Leona reasoned. "Besides, I'll be careful." What she didn't tell her father was that she had another purpose. During her last visit, she'd noticed something, or rather, someone. Judge Artemis Fitzgerald maintained an office above the bank, and if there was any legal way to stop Crow, it would start there. The ride to town was uneventful. Though Leona kept Kane's rifle close and took a circuitous route, she entered Red Creek from the north, tying Dusty behind the general store rather than on Main Street. Dr. Morrison seemed surprised to see her. "Miss Monroe, after the excitement during your last visit, I didn't expect you back so soon. My father needs more carbolic acid, and perhaps some morphine. The laudanum isn't quite strong enough." As Morrison prepared her order, he lowered his voice. "You should know that Crow's been spreading stories about you. Says you've taken up with that outlaw, Kane. Some folks are calling it scandalous." "Some folks have too much time for gossip," Leona replied evenly. "True enough. But Crow's using it to turn opinion against your family. Says your father's harboring a killer." Morrison handed her the supplies. "Just be careful, my dear. Crow owns more of this town than most realize." Leona paid and slipped the medicines into her saddlebag. Then, instead of leaving, she made her way to Judge Fitzgerald's office. The stairs creaked under her boots, and she could hear voices from inside, heated voices, arguing. She knocked, and the voices ceased abruptly. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp gray eyes. Judge Fitzgerald. "Yes." His gaze took in her appearance, the divided skirt, the gun belt, the determined set of her jaw. "You'd be Miss Monroe. You know who I am." "Young woman, everyone in 3 counties knows who you are by now." He stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The office was cramped but tidy, law books lining every wall. Another man sat in a chair by the window, younger, with the ink-stained fingers of a clerk or lawyer. "This is Mr. Nathaniel Harper, newly arrived from Austin. He's what you might call a special prosecutor." Fitzgerald closed the door carefully. "We've been discussing the situation with Jedediah Crow." "Then you know what he's trying to do." "We know what everyone knows," Harper said carefully. That Crow is a successful businessman expanding his holdings. He's a thief and a murderer, Leona said flatly. He shot my father. He's burned out the Hendricks family. How many others before them? Proving such allegations in court requires evidence. Fitzgerald said, witnesses, documentation, things that tend to disappear when Crow is involved. Or the witnesses do, Harper added quietly. Leona studied both men. There was something here, some undercurrent she didn't understand. Why is a special prosecutor from Austin interested in Crow? Harper and Fitzgerald exchanged glances. Finally, Harper spoke. There have been irregularities in land transfers throughout this region. The territorial governor is concerned. I'm here to investigate, quietly. How quietly can you investigate when Crow owns half the town? That's the problem, Fitzgerald admitted. We need someone to file formal charges, to stand up in court and testify, but everyone's too frightened. I'll do it. Both men looked surprised. Harper recovered first. Miss Monroe, you should understand the risks. Crow has influence with certain judges, lawmen. Even if we could guarantee your safety during a trial, which we can't, there's no assurance of justice. Then why are you here? Because we have to try. Fitzgerald said simply, because if men like Crow go unchallenged, then law means nothing. Leona thought of her father, wounded but unbowed, of Cain, carrying his guilt like shackles, of all the families driven from their homes by Crow's greed. Tell me what you need. For the next hour, they went over details. Harper took her statement about the attack on the ranch, the ambush of her father, the threats and violence. He was thorough, professional, asking questions that made her think carefully about exact words and sequences of events. This is good, he said finally. With your testimony and what we've already gathered, we might have enough for federal charges. Land fraud crosses territorial lines. How long? Leona asked. To build a proper case, weeks, maybe months. We don't have months. Crow gave us a week, and that was 4 days ago. Fitzgerald stroked his beard thoughtfully. There might be another way. A temporary injunction preventing Crow from taking any action against your property while the investigation proceeds. I could issue it today. Would Crow respect it? Probably not, Fitzgerald admitted. But it would give us legal grounds to call in federal marshals if he violates it. Make it harder for local law to look the other way. Do it. As Fitzgerald prepared the papers, Harper pulled Leona aside. You're brave, Miss Monroe. But bravery won't stop a bullet. You should consider leaving town until this is resolved. And let Crow take everything my family's built, no. Then at least be careful who you trust. Crow has ears everywhere in Red Creek. Leona thought of Cain, somewhere in the Badlands, risking himself for strangers. Trust was a luxury, but sometimes it was also a necessity. She was just leaving the judge's office when trouble found her. 3 men blocked the stairs, rough types she recognized as regulars at Crow's Double Eagle Ranch. Miss Monroe, the leader said with mock courtesy. Mr. Crow would like a word. Then Mr. Crow can come to the Monroe Ranch like a civilized person. Now, that's not very friendly, Mr. Crow's just across the street at the Horseshoe. Won't take but a minute. Leona's hand drifted toward her gun. I said no. Wasn't really a request. The man's smile was all teeth. You can walk over, or we can carry you. Your choice. The space was too confined for gunplay. She'd be dead before clearing leather, but going with them willingly felt like surrender. She was still weighing options when footsteps sounded on the stairs below. Afternoon, gentlemen. The voice was feminine but carried steel underneath. Is there a problem here? The men turned, revealing a woman in her 30s, well-dressed but with calloused hands that spoke of hard work. She carried a shopping basket in one hand and a Remington pocket pistol in the other. No problem. Mrs. Daniels, the leader said warily. Just having a conversation. Looked more like three men cornering a young woman to me. Mrs. Daniels climbed the stairs, positioning herself beside Leona. Don't believe we've met, dear. I'm Sarah Daniels. I run the boarding house on 2nd Street. Leona Monroe. Ah, Sam's girl. I knew your mother. Sarah's smile was warm, but her eyes remained cold as winter watching the three men. Fine woman. Shame she's not here to see what cowards pass for men these days. The insult hung in the air. The leader's face darkened. You should mind your own business. Woman. Oh, but I am. Sarah's pistol never wavered. See, Miss Monroe here represents something. Call it hope, if you like. The hope that folks might stand up to bullies who think money makes them kings. She cocked the hammer with her thumb. Now, you boys are going to walk down those stairs nice and quiet, and you're going to tell Crow that Miss Monroe was unavailable. Unless you'd prefer I start screaming about how three men tried to abduct a young woman in broad daylight. This ain't over, the leader growled. Never is with men like you. Sarah smiled sweetly. Now get. They went, grudgingly, casting dark looks back. Sarah waited until they were gone before lowering her pistol. Thank you, Leona breathed. Don't thank me yet. You just painted a bigger target on yourself by coming here. Sarah studied her shrewdly. Though I suspect you knew that. What were you doing in the judge's office? Looking for justice. In Red Creek, Sarah laughed, but not unkindly. You really are your mother's daughter. Come on, let's get you off the street before those fools gather their courage. Sarah's boarding house was clean and respectable, with lace curtains and the smell of fresh bread. She led Leona to a private parlor and poured tea from a china pot that looked out of place on the frontier. Your mother and I came west on the same wagon train, Sarah explained. She was the only one who talked to me. The others thought I was too forward, too independent for a woman. What happened to her papa never talks about how she died. Sarah's expression softened. Fever took her, but not before she made your father promise to raise you strong. Seems he kept that promise. They talked for nearly an hour. Sarah knew things. Which merchants were in Crow's pocket, which lawmen could be trusted, where the real power in Red Creek lay. Information that could prove valuable. Crow's not invincible, Sarah said. He's just convinced everyone he is. But empires built on fear have a way of crumbling when people stop being afraid. Are you not afraid? Oh, I'm terrified. Sarah's smile was rueful. But I'm also tired. Tired of men like Crow deciding who prospers and who suffers. You're standing up to him as people talking. Some are even finding their courage. A commotion in the street drew them to the window. A crowd was gathering in front of the Horseshoe Saloon. At its center stood Jedediah Crow himself, dressed in his customary black suit despite the heat. Citizens of Red Creek. Crow's voice carried clearly. It pains me to address you under such circumstances, but lawlessness must be confronted, no matter how painful. What's he doing? Leona whispered. Nothing good. Sarah replied grimly. As many of you know. Crow continued. The Monroe family has chosen to harbor a dangerous criminal. Ethan Kane, deserter, killer, and now, apparently, kidnapper of young women. Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. Leona's hands clenched into fists. I have just received word that Kane attacked my men without provocation, killing one and wounding several others. This violence cannot stand. Therefore, I'm offering $2,000 to any man who brings me Kane, dead or alive, and another $1,000 for information leading to his capture. The crowd stirred with interest. $3,000 was more than most would see in a lifetime. Furthermore, Crow raised his voice over the noise. Anyone providing aid or shelter to Kane will be considered accomplices. The law is clear on such matters. He's turning the whole town against us. Leona breathed. Not the whole town, Sarah said quietly. Look closer. Indeed, While many in the crowd seemed excited by the bounty, others looked troubled. Leona recognized some of them. Small ranchers, farmers, people who'd felt Crow's pressure themselves. "I have to warn Kane," Leona said. "You have to get home safely first." Sarah pressed a small derringer into her hand. "Take this, and take the back alleys. Crow's made his play. He'll have men watching for you now." Leona slipped out the rear door as twilight gathered. The streets felt different now, hostile. Every shadow could hide a bounty hunter. Every stranger might be calculating her value to Crow. She'd nearly reached Dusty when footsteps echoed in the alley behind her. She spun, hand on her gun, to find Marshal Briggs standing there, badge glinting in the fading light. "Miss Monroe, heard you were in town." "Marshal." She kept her hand on the gun butt. "If you're looking for Kane—" "I'm not." Briggs looked older than when she'd last seen him, worn down. "Lost 4 deputies in that fracas when Kane escaped. Good men, mostly." He sighed. "I've been lawman for 20 years. Thought I knew the difference between right and legal. Lately, I'm not so sure. What do you want?" "To give you a warning. Crow's got something planned. Don't know what, but he's pulled in gunmen from 3 counties. Whatever's coming, it'll be soon." "Why tell me?" Briggs was quiet for a moment. "Maybe because I'm tired of being Crow's puppet. Maybe because your father's a good man who deserves better. Or maybe because that game of cards with Kane reminded me there's still such a thing as honor." He touched his hat brim. "You didn't see me, Miss Monroe, but you be ready." He melted back into the shadows, leaving Leona shaken. If even Briggs was having doubts about Crow, perhaps Sarah was right. Perhaps the empire of fear was beginning to crack. She mounted Dusty and headed home through gathering darkness. Behind her, Red Creek buzzed with talk of bounties and blood. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the knowledge that time was running out. But she carried more than medical supplies now. She carried information, allies, and the hope that justice might still be possible in a land where might too often made right. The judge's injunction was tucked safe in her saddlebag, a piece of paper that might mean nothing or everything, depending on who was willing to enforce it. Thunder rumbled again in the distance, and this time clouds were building on the horizon. A storm was coming in more ways than one. As Leona urged Dusty into a lope, she thought of Kane out there somewhere, now with a fortune on his head. She thought of her father, wounded but determined, of Sarah Daniels and her quiet courage, of all the small people standing against the large shadow of Jedediah Crow. The ranch appeared ahead, lamplight warm in the windows. Home, worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. But first, worth living for. Worth trying to build something better than what men like Crow offered. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Leona rode toward home with renewed determination. The real battle was just beginning. The storm had passed by the time Kane returned to the Monroe Ranch, but its aftermath left the air clean and sharp with the scent of sage and wet earth. Leona saw him coming from the porch where she'd been keeping watch. A lone rider emerging from the pre-dawn darkness like something out of a dream. She met him at the barn's remains, noting the exhaustion etched in every line of his body. His clothes were torn, dust-caked, and there were new scratches on his hands and face. $3,000, she said without preamble. "That's what Crow put on your head." Kane dismounted stiffly, a wry smile touching his lips. "Is that all? I'm almost insulted." His expression sobered as he took in her worried face. "You went back to town." "Papa needed medicine, and I needed to know what we're really facing." She helped him unsaddle the black stallion, their hands occasionally brushing in the familiar ritual. "Crow's brought in hired guns. Marshal Briggs says something big is coming." "Briggs." Kane's eyebrows rose. "That's unexpected." He seemed conflicted, said Papa was a good man who deserved better. Kane was quiet as they walked toward the house, the rising sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. I found their main camp. About 15 men, maybe 20. Professional killers. Most of them. Crow's not taking chances anymore. 20 men? Leona's heart sank. How can we fight those odds? Same way I held that bridge at Antietam. Make them come to us, make the ground work in our favor, and make every shot count. He paused at the porch steps. Your father's neighbors, did they answer his call? Tom Washington and his boys will come. The Ramirez family, too. Maybe 8 or 9 men total. She shook her head. It's not enough. It'll have to be. Inside, Samuel was awake and sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle with practiced movements. He looked up as they entered, his sharp eyes taking in Kane's battered appearance. Learn anything useful? Samuel asked. They'll hit us tomorrow night. Maybe the night after. Crow wants to do this quick before federal marshals get wind of it. Kane accepted the cup of coffee Leona poured with grateful hands. He's planning to make it look like Indian raiders or Mexican bandits. No survivors to tell different. Except he didn't count on you, Samuel observed. Or your daughter. Kane's gaze found Leona across the table. She's got more sand than most men I've ridden with. An odd tension filled the kitchen, not unpleasant, but charged with unspoken words. Samuel cleared his throat. Well then, we'd best prepare for a siege. Leona, help me move the furniture. We'll need firing positions at every window. Kane, that smokehouse is solid adobe. Might make a good fallback position if they breach the main house. They worked through the day, transforming the modest ranch house into a fortress. Furniture became barricades, windows sprouted gun barrels, and ammunition was distributed to strategic locations. Tom Washington arrived near noon with his 2 grown sons, all 3 armed with well-maintained Winchesters. Sam, Tom said, gripping Samuel's hand. Heard you were having some trouble with unwanted guests. Could get ugly, Tom. No shame in staying clear of this. Crow burned me out 2 years ago. Tom replied flatly, I've been waiting for a chance to return the favor. Throughout the afternoon, more neighbors trickled in. The Ramirez brothers, Juan and Carlos, brought not just guns, but dynamite left over from their mining days. Old Martha Perkins, whom everyone had thought too elderly for such business, showed up with a Sharps rifle that had seen service in the Mexican War. I can still shoot the eye out of a squirrel at 100 yards, she declared, daring anyone to argue. By evening, they had 13 defenders, including Leona. Not an army, but people with purpose, people who'd been pushed too far by men like Crow. As darkness fell, Kane pulled Leona aside. They stood in the ruins of the barn, away from the others, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. I need to ask you something, he said, his voice unusually hesitant. If things go bad tomorrow, they won't. But if they do, he caught her hands in his, rough calluses against her work-worn palms. Promise me you'll run. Take your father and get out. Would you run? That's different. Why? Because you're a man, because you've got nothing to lose. Leona stepped closer, close enough to see the storm in his gray-blue eyes. This is my home. Ethan, my mother is buried on that hill. I won't let Crow take it. Stubborn woman, he murmured, but there was admiration in it. So I've been told. They stood there in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, neither willing to break the contact. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver shadows through the burned timbers. Leona, Kane began, then stopped, struggling with words. These past days with you, they've meant something, made me remember who I used to be, before the war, before everything went wrong. Who were you? Just a farm boy from Ohio who thought he could save the world. His laugh was bitter. Turns out the world doesn't want saving, it just wants surviving. Maybe that's enough. Maybe surviving with purpose is its own kind of saving. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. When did you get so wise? somewhere between running for my life and digging a bullet out of your arm. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Don't be gentle," she whispered, echoing words she'd only thought before but never dared speak. Kane made a sound part laugh, part growl, all male. "You have no idea what you're asking." "Then show me." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then his mouth found hers, and the world narrowed to this moment, this connection. His kiss was everything she'd imagined, fierce and tender by turns, speaking of loneliness and longing and something that might be hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. "This is dangerous," he said. "Getting attached when tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we fight," Leona interrupted. "Tonight, we're alive. Isn't that enough?" He pulled her closer, and she felt the rapid beat of his heart through his shirt. "You terrify me, Leona Monroe, and I've faced Confederate cavalry charges." "Good, then we're even." They might have stayed there forever, wrapped in moonlight and each other, but the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Kane was moving before the hoofbeats fully registered, pulling Leona behind cover, gun already in hand. But the rider who appeared was alone, a woman on a paint mare, riding hard. As she drew closer, Leona recognized her. Sarah. Sarah Daniels dismounted in a rush, her usual composure cracked. "They're coming. Tonight, not tomorrow. One of Crow's men got drunk, started bragging. They'll hit you just before dawn." "How many?" Kane asked. 25, maybe 30. Crow's leading them personally." Sarah gripped Leona's arm. "There's more. He's got papers, forged documents showing your father sold him the ranch months ago. Plans to claim you're all squatters who attacked him. The judge's injunction won't matter if there's no one alive to dispute Crow's version." Sarah looked between them urgently. "You need to run. All of you. Live to fight another day." "No." Samuel's voice came from the porch. He stood straight despite his wounds, rifle in hand. "This is where we make our stand. Sarah, you'd best get back to town before you're missed." "I'm staying," Sarah said firmly. "I can shoot, and you need every gun." "This isn't your fight," Leona protested. "It became my fight the day I watched Crow destroy his first family." Sarah's smile was sharp. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you survive to tell the real story." They had perhaps 6 hours. The defenders took positions, checked weapons, said prayers or made peace with whatever demons they carried. Kane moved among them like a ghost, adjusting fields of fire, suggesting improvements, sharing hard-won knowledge from too many battles. "They'll try to burn us out," he told the assembled group. "Fire arrows, maybe torches. Keep buckets of water handy, and don't panic. Panic kills more men than bullets." "What about their numbers?" Tom Washington asked. "Numbers mean less in the dark, in close quarters. Make them come to us. Make them pay for every foot." Kane's eyes were cold, professional. This was the soldier, not the man who'd kissed her in the moonlight. And remember, Crow's men are hired killers. They're here for money. We're here for home. That makes a difference. The hours crawled by. Leona found herself stationed at an upstairs window with Sarah, overlooking the approaches to the house. Her father commanded the lower floor with the Washington boys. Kane moved between positions, a restless shadow. "He loves you," Sarah observed quietly, checking her rifle for the 10th time. "He's never said so." "Men like him don't love in words. They love in actions, in sacrifice." Sarah smiled sadly. "I had one like him once. Lost him to Comancheros 10 years back. Don't make my mistake. Leona, don't wait for perfect moments that never come." Before Leona could respond, Kane appeared in the doorway. "Movement to the west. They're getting into position." He paused, his gaze finding Leona. "Whatever happens, stay low. And if I tell you to run—" "I won't." "Stubborn woman," he said again. but this time it sounded like a prayer. Then he was gone, and there was nothing to do but wait. The night stretched tight as a drumhead, every sound magnified. An owl called somewhere, and Leona wondered if it was real or a signal. The attack, when it came, exploded from silence into chaos. Fire arrows arced through the darkness, trailing flame like falling stars. Windows shattered, guns roared. The night erupted in muzzle flashes and the screams of men. Leona fired mechanically, picking targets, trying not to think about the fact that each shadow had been a person beside her. Sarah proved as good as her word, placing shots with deadly precision. "The smokehouse!" someone shouted. "They're at the smokehouse!" Through her window, Leona saw figures scaling the adobe walls. Without thinking, she grabbed a bucket of oil they'd prepared and flung it down. Following with a burning brand, men screamed and fell back as flames erupted. Downstairs, the fighting intensified. She could hear her father's voice, steady and commanding, directing fire. The Ramirez brothers' dynamite spoke in thunderous exclamations, scattering attackers. But there were so many. For everyone that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. And somewhere in that chaos was Crow, orchestrating death like a conductor. "Leona!" Sarah's warning came just as a grappling hook sailed through their window. Men were climbing the walls, trying to gain the upper floor. The next minutes were a blur. Sarah shot one attacker as he crested the sill. Leona clubbed another with her rifle butt. But more kept coming, and their ammunition was running low. That's when she heard it. Cain's voice, roaring above the battle, wordless and primal. Through the window, she saw him emerge from cover like an avenging angel. Both guns blazing, he carved through Crow's men with terrible efficiency, drawing their fire, giving the defenders precious seconds to regroup. "He's trying to draw them off," Sarah breathed. "The damn fool's making himself a target." Leona was already moving, heading for the stairs. But strong hands caught her, her father, bloody but unbowed. "No, girl, this is his choice, his moment." Samuel's eyes were fierce. "Honor it." Through the shattered windows, they watched Cain's one-man war. He moved like death itself, never still, always attacking. Men fell before him like wheat before a scythe. For a moment, it seemed he might single-handedly turn the tide. Then Leona saw him. Crow, emerging from shadow, rifle raised. Time slowed. She screamed a warning, but her voice was lost in the battle's roar. The shot took Cain high in the chest, spinning him around. He went down hard but came up shooting, his return fire driving Crow to cover, but the damage was done. Cain was hurt, badly, and Crow's men were closing in. "Cover him!" Samuel roared, and every defender who could still shoot opened fire. Under that covering barrage, Cain somehow made it back to the house, half crawling, half dragging himself. Leona met him at the door, hauling him inside as bullets chewed the doorframe to splinters. "You fool," she said, tears streaming as she pressed cloth to his wound. "You beautiful, stupid fool. Had to thin them out." Blood bubbled on his lips. "Did it work?" "Look for yourself," Samuel said grimly. Indeed, the attack was faltering. Cain's assault had cost Crow dearly, at least 8 men down, maybe more. The remaining attackers pulled back, their enthusiasm for the fight visibly diminished. In the pre-dawn quiet that followed, they could hear Crow screaming at his men, threatening, cajoling, but mercenaries' courage had limits. And those limits had been found. "They'll try again," Cain wheezed. "Crow's too invested to quit now." "Let them come," old Martha Perkins said, reloading her sharps. "We're still here, still fighting." As dawn broke, painting the battlefield in shades of red, Leona held Cain close and felt his heartbeat against her palm. Steady, stubborn, alive. Around them, their small band of defenders prepared for whatever came next. They'd survived the night, but the day was far from won, And somewhere out there. Crow waited, his empire of fear cracking but not yet broken. The real test was still to come. The sun climbed higher, revealing the full scope of the night's carnage. Bodies littered the ground around the Monroe Ranch, and the acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Inside the bullet-riddled house, the defenders took stock of their situation. Kane lay on the kitchen table, his face gray with pain while Leona worked to extract the bullet from his chest. Her hands were steady despite the fear clawing at her heart. Doctor. Morrison's training served her well. The wound was serious, but not immediately fatal if kept clean. You're getting too good at this. Kane managed through gritted teeth. I'd rather not need the practice, Leona replied, finally working the lead free. She doused the wound with the last of their carbolic acid, trying not to think about what would happen if infection set in. Samuel stood watch at the window, his own wound seeping through fresh bandages. They're regrouping. Looks like Crow's bringing up something from the supply wagon. Tom Washington squinted through his field glasses. Lord Almighty, is that what I think it is? Juan Ramirez cursed in Spanish. Cannon. They have a cannon. Sure enough, Crow's remaining men were positioning a small field piece, probably stolen from some military depot. Even a small cannon could reduce the house to rubble in minutes. Well, Martha Perkins said dryly, that's hardly sporting. Despite the gravity of their situation, nervous laughter rippled through the defenders. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and now facing artillery. By all rights, they should surrender. Instead, Samuel Monroe smiled. Kane, you still conscious? Unfortunately. Remember what you said about making the ground work for us? I think it's time to change the battlefield. Kane's eyes sharpened despite his pain. What did you have in mind? The old Willow Creek Bridge. If we can make it there, the canyon gives us cover, and they can't bring that cannon across. The bridge is narrow. Numbers won't matter as much. It's 3 miles, Sarah pointed out. Can we make it with wounded? We can if we time it right. Kane struggled to sit up, waving off Leona's protests. They'll need at least an hour to properly position that cannon. If we move now, using the smoke from the barn fire as cover. It was desperate, but desperation had become their companion. They loaded the wounded onto the 2 remaining wagons, women driving while men rode guard. Leona stayed close to Kane's wagon, rifle ready. They'd made it perhaps a mile when riders appeared on their flanks. Crow had anticipated the move. Gunfire erupted again, the running battle stretching across the Texas plain like a scene from hell. The bridge, Samuel shouted. Make for the bridge. The old wooden structure spanning Willow Creek had been built in better days, when the town fathers dreamed of prosperity. Now it stood as their last hope, its weathered timbers groaning under the weight of wagons and horses. They crossed in a rush, defenders turning to hold the far side. Crow's men, seeing their quarry escaping, charged forward recklessly. That recklessness cost them as concentrated fire from the Monroe party dropped riders from their saddles. Now, Kane commanded, and Carlos Ramirez lit the fuse on their last stick of dynamite. The explosion shattered the morning air, sending the center section of the bridge into the creek below. Crow's men pulled up short, suddenly separated from their prey by 20 feet of empty air and rushing water. On the far bank, Jedediah Crow himself sat his black horse, face twisted with rage. You only delay the inevitable, he shouted across the gap. I'll have that land. Monroe, I'll have it if I have to kill every last one of you. Come and try, Samuel shouted back, though the effort left him swaying in his saddle. They retreated to defensible positions among the rocks above the creek, tending wounds and counting ammunition. Their situation was improved, but far from safe. Crow still had superior numbers and that cannon. The creek would slow him down, not stop him. We bought time, Kane said, leaning heavily against a boulder while Leona rebandaged his chest. Question is, what do we do with it? I might have an answer to that, a new voice said. Everyone spun, weapons rising, to find Marshal Briggs standing at the edge of their camp. He held his hands high, badge glinting in the sun. "Easy now. I come in peace." He looked older, worn down by the night's events. Brought some friends, too. Behind him, a dozen riders emerged from the brush. Townspeople from Red Creek, armed and ready. Leona recognized several faces: shopkeepers, ranchers, even the bartender from the Horseshoe. "Heard you folks were having some trouble," Briggs continued. "Figured it was time to pick a side." "Why now?" Samuel asked suspiciously. "Because Crow went too far. Using a cannon against civilians, bringing in hired killers. That's not business anymore. That's war." Briggs removed his hat, running fingers through gray hair. "I've been a lawman for 20 years, and I've made my share of compromises. But there comes a time when a man has to look in the mirror and decide who he wants to be." "Besides," one of the townsmen added, "Judge Fitzgerald showed us them federal papers. Says Crow's been stealing land all over the territory. Says there's marshals coming, but they won't be here for days." "So we figured," another man said. "Why wait for federal help when we can handle our own problems?" The reinforcements changed everything. Now the numbers were more even. And more importantly, Crow's men would be fighting their own neighbors. The psychological impact was immediate, across the creek. They could see uncertainty in the enemy ranks. But Crow wasn't finished. As the morning wore on, he sent riders upstream and downstream, looking for crossing points. The defenders spread out to cover more ground, knowing they were being stretched thin. It was Leona who spotted the real threat. "They're building rafts," she called from her lookout position. "They mean to float that cannon across." Kane hauled himself upright despite his wound. "Then we need to attack before they're ready. Hit them while they're divided." "You're in no condition," Leona began. "I'm in no condition to sit here and wait to die," Kane corrected. "Samuel, how many men can ride?" They assembled a strike force. 8 men, including Kane, who had to be helped into his saddle. The plan was simple: hit hard and fast, destroy the rafts, and retreat before Crow could concentrate his forces. "I'm coming with you," Leona declared. "No," Kane and her father said simultaneously. "Yes." Her voice brooked no argument. "You need every gun, and I'm done watching from the sidelines." There was no time to argue. They splashed across the creek at a shallow point 200 yards upstream. Using the cottonwoods for cover, the raft-building party was focused on their work. Guards relaxed in the midday heat. The attack was swift and brutal. They hit the work party from 3 sides, scattering men and destroying the half-built rafts. Leona found herself in the thick of it, firing and reloading with mechanical precision. This wasn't the terrified girl who'd fled into the night days ago. This was a woman fighting for her home. But Crow had learned too. Even as they destroyed the rafts, riders appeared, reinforcements moving faster than expected. The retreat became a running fight, horses splashing through the creek under fire. Kane's horse stumbled, and he would have fallen if Leona hadn't been there. Grabbing his reins, pulling him along. Blood seeped through his bandages, but his gun still spoke with deadly authority. They made it back to their lines, but the cost was clear. 2 men down, several wounded, and Crow still had that cannon. "He'll try again tonight," Briggs predicted. "Man's too invested to quit now." As afternoon wore toward evening, both sides prepared for what everyone knew would be the final confrontation. Crow's men built new rafts. This time under heavy guard, the defenders dug in, making every rock a fortress. Leona found a moment to sit with Kane, who was growing weaker despite his protests. "You need a doctor," she said. "I need Crow stopped," he replied. "Everything else can wait." "You're a fool, Ethan Kane." "So you keep telling me." He caught her hand. "Leona, if something happens..." "Nothing's going to happen. We're going to win. You're going to heal. And then we're going to have a long conversation about the future." "The future," he smiled weakly. I had almost forgotten there was such a thing. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, activity across the creek intensified. Crow was committing everything to one final assault. The rafts were ready, the cannon loaded. "Here they come," someone called. It started with covering fire. Crow's riflemen peppering the defenders' positions while the rafts launched. The cannon's first shot whistled overhead, exploding against the cliff face and showering them with rock fragments. "Hold your fire," Samuel commanded. "Wait for them to commit." The rafts reached midstream, packed with men. The cannon raft moved slower, its weight making it unwieldy. That's when the defenders opened up. Concentrated fire turning the creek into a killing ground. But Crow had one more card to play. As his main force engaged, riders appeared from downstream. He'd sent men on a wide loop, crossing miles away. They hit the defenders' flank, threatening to roll up the entire line. The battle became a desperate melee. Sarah Daniels, calm as ever, picked off attackers with methodical precision. The Ramirez brothers used their mining knowledge to trigger small rock slides, blocking approaches. Old Martha Perkins, laughing like a woman half her age, worked her Sharps rifle like she was back in her youth. In the center of it all, Leona fought with a fury that surprised even her. When her rifle ran dry, she used her pistol. When that emptied, she grabbed a fallen man's weapon and kept firing, beside her, despite his wounds. Kane was a deadly presence, proof that skill could triumph over numbers. The tide turned when Marshal Briggs personally led a charge against the flanking force, the townspeople, fighting for their own freedom from Crow's tyranny. Followed with a roar, the flankers, caught between two forces, broke and ran. Seeing his flanking force crumble, Crow made a fatal error. Furious, he abandoned his protected position and rode forward, trying to rally his men personally. It put him in the open, in range. 3 rifles spoke as one: Samuel, Kane, and Leona, father and daughter, and the man who'd become family, all firing at the same moment. Crow tumbled from his horse into the creek, the water around him turning red. With their leader down, Crow's remaining men lost heart. Some fled immediately. Others, seeing the writing on the wall, threw down their weapons. The Battle of Willow Creek was over. As the gun smoke cleared and silence descended, Leona found herself still standing, though she couldn't say how. Around her, the defenders emerged from cover, bloody but victorious. They had held, they had won. She turned to Kane, ready to share the victory, and found him collapsed against a rock, fresh blood pooling beneath him. The final fight had reopened his wounds, perhaps fatally. "No," she whispered, dropping beside him. "No, you don't get to leave now. Not after everything." His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face. "Did we win?" Yes, we won." "Good." His hand found hers, weak but warm. "That's good." Around them, the aftermath of battle gave way to desperate medical efforts. Dr. Morrison had somehow appeared. Sarah must have sent for him during the fight. As he worked over Kane, Leona held tight to his hand and made promises to God, to fate, to anyone who might be listening. The sun set over Willow Creek, painting the battlefield in softer shades. The empire of fear that Jedediah Crow had built lay in ruins, but the cost of victory was still being counted, and Leona could only wait and hope that the price wouldn't include the man who'd taught her that even in the darkest times, people could still choose to be good. The battle was won. The war for Kane's life had just begun. 3 weeks had passed since the battle at Willow Creek. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Monroe Ranch, where new timber frames rose from the ashes of the old barn. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air as neighbors worked together, rebuilding what Crow's hatred had destroyed. Leona stood on the porch, watching the construction with satisfaction tinged with worry. Inside the house, Ethan Kane still fought his own battle. Dr. Morrison had managed to save his life, But recovery was slow and uncertain. For days, fever had gripped him, and Leona had barely left his side. "He's asking for you," Sarah Daniels said, emerging from the house. She'd stayed to help with nursing duties, her calm presence a blessing during the darkest hours. Leona hurried inside to find Kane propped up in bed, still pale but alert. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in her chest eased at his slight smile. "You look tired," he said. "You look alive," she countered, sitting beside the bed. "That's all that matters." "Leona," he caught her hand. "We need to talk about what happens now. You heal, that's what happens. The warrant's still active. $700 on my head hasn't gone away just because we won one fight." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You deserve better than a life looking over your shoulder." Before Leona could respond, commotion erupted outside. Horses, many of them, approaching fast. Her heart clenched. Not again, not when they were still recovering. But Samuel's voice carried through the window, surprised but not alarmed. "Marshal Fitzgerald didn't expect to see you out here." Leona helped Kane to the window where they could see a group of riders, not threatening but official. Federal badges glinted in the sunlight, and Judge Fitzgerald rode among them. "Mr. Monroe," the judge called out, "might we have a word? It concerns recent events and certain legal matters." They gathered in the main room. Samuel, Leona, Kane, who insisted on dressing and joining them despite protests, Sarah, and several of the neighbors who'd fought beside them. Judge Fitzgerald entered with 2 federal marshals and Nathaniel Harper, the special prosecutor from Austin. "First," Fitzgerald began, "let me say that what happened here has sent ripples all the way to Washington. A prominent businessman killed while attacking citizens with military weapons. It's caused quite a stir." "Crow was a murderer and a thief," Samuel said flatly. "Indeed, and Mr. Harper here has spent the last weeks documenting exactly that." The prosecutor opened a leather case, revealing stacks of documents. Forged deeds, falsified claims, intimidation, murder. Jedediah Crow built an empire on crimes that spanned 3 territories. More importantly, one of the federal marshals added, several of his surviving men have agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. Your defense of this ranch has given others the courage to come forward. That's all well and good, Kane said quietly. But it doesn't change my situation. Judge Fitzgerald's eyes twinkled. Ah, yes, Mr. Kane, the deserter with a price on his head. He produced an official-looking document. Interesting thing about military law. It allows for review of cases when new evidence comes to light. Harper took over. We've been in communication with the War Department. Several soldiers from your unit at Tucson have provided testimony about what really happened. The ambush you allegedly led them into turns out you were following orders from a superior who was later court-martialed for incompetence. You were a scapegoat. Mr. Kane. Kane sat very still. What are you saying? I'm saying, Fitzgerald smiled, that a full pardon has been granted. Your desertion is forgiven in light of the circumstances, and all warrants for your arrest have been withdrawn. You're a free man, Mr. Kane. The room erupted in celebration. Sarah hugged Leona, who was trying not to cry. Samuel shook Kane's hand with genuine warmth. Even crusty Martha Perkins was seen to wipe at her eyes. But Kane himself seemed stunned, as if freedom was a concept too foreign to grasp immediately. I don't understand. After everything I've done... What you've done, Marshal Fitzgerald said firmly, is stand up for justice when it would have been easier to keep running. The government recognizes courage when it sees it. Mr. Kane, eventually. As the officials departed, promising to help with the remaining legal matters regarding land rights and damages, the ranch settled into a different kind of activity. The threat was gone. The future suddenly opened with possibility. That evening, As the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Leona found Kane sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the land. "Penny for your thoughts," she asked, settling beside him. "Just trying to understand it all. For years, I've been running. It defined everything, where I went, who I could trust, who I could be." He looked at her. "Now that I can stop running, I'm not sure what comes next." "Well," Leona said carefully, "Papa's going to need help running this place. The barn needs finishing, the herd needs tending, and we lost a lot of fence line in the fighting." "Are you offering me a job, Miss Monroe?" "I'm offering you a home, Ethan Kane." She turned to face him fully. "If you want it." He was quiet for a long moment, and Leona felt her heart racing. Then his hand found hers, fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I spent years convinced I didn't deserve peace, didn't deserve happiness. The faces of those men who died under my command haunted every step." He squeezed her hand. "But these past weeks, fighting beside you, protecting something worth protecting. Maybe redemption isn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it's about choosing a better future." "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering with words, Kane pulled her close and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Leona was breathless. "That's definitely a yes," she murmured. "Good thing, too." Samuel's voice came from the doorway, amused. "Because I already told everyone in town you'd be staying on as foreman. Man can't go back on his word." The next morning brought more surprises. A wagon rolled up to the ranch, and Tom Washington climbed down with a broad grin. "Folks in town took up a collection," he announced. "Figured those who fought for justice deserved some help rebuilding." The wagon was loaded with supplies: lumber, nails, tools, even a new plow. More neighbors arrived throughout the day, ready to help raise the barn properly this time. As Leona worked alongside the others, she marveled at the transformation. Just weeks ago, these people had lived in fear of Crow's shadow. Now they worked together, laughed together, building something stronger than any one family could manage alone. "It's something, isn't it?" Kane said, appearing at her elbow. He was still moving carefully, but the color had returned to his face. Community. "It's what Crow never understood," Leona replied. He thought fear was strength, but real strength comes from people choosing to stand together. Work on the barn continued for days. During that time, more news trickled in from Red Creek. With Crow's empire collapsed, honest businesses were thriving. The town council, no longer under his thumb, had voted in new ordinances protecting small ranchers. Even Marshal Briggs, keeping his badge with federal approval, seemed determined to enforce actual law rather than Crow's will. One evening, as the barn neared completion, Sarah Daniels prepared to return to town. She'd been offered a position on the new town council, the first woman to hold such a role in the territory. "You'll visit?" she asked Leona. "Try to keep me away." Leona hugged her friend. "Thank you for everything." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "You reminded us all that courage is contagious, that one person standing up can inspire others to do the same." As Sarah's wagon disappeared down the road, Kane joined Leona on the porch. The sunset was particularly spectacular, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold. "No regrets?" Leona asked. "About what?" "Giving up the wandering life, settling down with a stubborn woman on a little ranch in Texas." Kane pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I've been a lot of things. Leona Monroe, soldier, deserter, hired gun, wanted man. But I think I'm ready to try being something new." "And what's that?" "Happy," he said simply. "I'm ready to try being happy." 6 months later, the Monroe Ranch hosted a celebration unlike any the territory had seen. The barn was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every family for miles around. Leona stood before the mirror in her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years. Sarah helped with the final touches, pinning orange blossoms in her hair. "Your mother would be so proud," Sarah said softly. "I hope so." Leona smoothed the silk, thinking of all that had brought her to this moment. "I think she'd understand that sometimes love comes from unexpected places." Outside, she could hear the musicians tuning up, the happy chatter of guests. The territorial governor himself had come, eager to meet the woman who'd sparked what newspapers were calling the Willow Creek Uprising. "Ready?" Samuel asked from the doorway, looking distinguished in his best suit. "Ready," Leona confirmed, taking his arm. They walked out into the golden afternoon light, where Ethan Kane waited by the makeshift altar. He stood tall and strong, the shadows gone from his eyes, replaced by something Leona had first glimpsed that night by the campfire hope. Judge Fitzgerald performed the ceremony, his words about love conquering adversity carrying special weight for all who'd lived through recent events. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Red Creek. As the celebration continued into the night dancing, storytelling, and more food than anyone could eat, Leona and Ethan found a moment alone. They stood on the hill behind the house, near her mother's grave, looking out over the land they'd fought to protect. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, arms wrapped around her from behind. "That Mama would have liked you, that Papa's finally healing properly, that we have good neighbors and true friends." She leaned back against his chest. "That sometimes the hardest roads lead to the best destinations." Very philosophical, Mrs. Kane. She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "I learned from the best. Now, shut up and kiss your wife." He obliged, and as their lips met, a warm breeze swept across the Texas plains, carrying the scent of sage and promise. Below them, the celebration continued, a community reborn, a future bright with possibility. The girl who'd ridden out desperate and alone had returned a woman who understood that strength came not from facing hardship alone, but from having the courage to let others stand beside you. The man who'd been running from his past had found a future worth staying for. And in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the American frontier, where the line between civilization and wildness was drawn fresh each day, two hearts had found home in each other, proof that even in the harshest ground, love could bloom as surely as wildflowers after rain. The stars came out one by one, ancient witnesses to the endless cycle of struggle and triumph. And on the Monroe Ranch, now the Kane Ranch too, the lights burned bright against the darkness, beacons of hope in a land that never stopped testing those brave enough to call it home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Leona and Ethan's journey from that dangerous first meeting to their wedding day. If you're listening to this tale, I'd love to know where in the world you are. Please leave a comment below sharing your location so we can connect and share our thoughts about the story. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Night Channel. Hit that like button and press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who love tales of courage, romance, and redemption in the American frontier. Until the next time, partners.